which was Donald Trump's interview with Fox News just an hour ago. He said that if Oman, the government in Oman gets in the way, we will bomb them. We will bomb them. He said something unpleasant about Oman, but I don't want to mention that. But he said that we're going to destroy Oman. And the other point that he was talking about, he said that Iran must raise the white flag of surrender. They are dying. This is the perception. Last night we learned from Marjorie Taylor Greene. She posted on X that they're talking about the use of nuclear bombs. This is the situation we're in. I was wondering, what is your assessment? What is happening in Washington? Because mostly they're controlling the whole escalation, because Iran is just watching what is going on in Washington to respond to that. What is happening in Washington in your eyes?
I think they're just losing it. I think they're just losing it. I mean, in all sorts of ways. By that, I mean they're just becoming desperate and therefore more and more deluded, because it's not so much just about Iran, it's about the economic situation and the bond market. And it's really getting worse and worse. The bond market is, the stock market can go up, but the bond market, the interest rates are going higher and higher. And that's bad news because it could collapse the AI on which Trump is betting everything. The AI build out, the big mega build out of AI, trillions going into this of money. And what happens when the money stops, when liquidity dries up? It's not all coming from the banks. A lot of it's coming from private credit, private equity, the shadow banking system. So a lot of it is coming from areas. And I remember the head of the BIS was saying, not so long ago, I heard him saying, and he said he just retired from the Bank for International Settlements, which is an international organization. He said, look, at the moment, he said, the banks, I mean, they're more or less regulated. I mean, he's talking about American banks mainly. And he said, but when you go into the private equity, the private credit sphere, he says that's now half of the credit giving structure in America. 50% of all credit is not coming from banks, but it is being given in terms of leverage and derivatives and all these things, either from hedge funds or from these sort of shadow banks. And then he added, and we haven't a clue what's going on there. We have no idea what's going on there. And he implied he thought there were quite a lot of not such good things going on there at all. So when you think of it in that terms, that, I mean, we know that most of these people are buying 3 times leveraged EFTs on AI products. So they're already 3 times leveraged structurally, 3 times leveraged. So of course, if it goes up a small amount, you make 3 times as, the profit is 3 times as much. Goes up by 3%, you get 9% or whatever, okay? But of course, if it goes down and if there's a collapse, then you're not losing 3%, you're losing 9%. That's the effective leverage. But those people who are buying these exchange-traded funds at 3 times leverage are actually getting further leverage to buy the 3 times leveraged fund. So if there is a problem with liquidity, if there is a problem with credit, then the consequences can be quite serious across. So we just put it like that, but really, really bad. And the bond market, and it's all tied into Japan and the crashing of the yen, because that is crucial. And also other markets, which, I mean, are just really almost sort of bankrupt in many ways. But the yen is crucial. It has, I think, it owns about 1.4 trillion of U.S. treasuries. The yen is losing value. They tried to bolster it. They did that. Besant started selling. He didn't sell. He didn't sell the dollars. A bit cheeky. He sold euros to buy yen, and rather than selling dollars, I don't think the ECB was so happy, but because they weren't informed or told. So anyway, they're trying to prop that up. But again, it's the value, as I understand it, is declining again. So, I mean, what are they going to do? Because at the moment, I mean, long-term interest rates go up in Japan, which they haven't done for 20 years or more, been stuck at zero. I mean, it's going to impact. And what we're seeing is long-term interest rates are going up everywhere altogether across many different states. So I think they're desperate, and their desperation is primarily about saving the AI project on which Trump is betting everything, the future of the American economy. And the AI project doesn't make sense. You know, I'm not a Wall Street I'm not sort of a technocrat of that sort at all, but simply the amount of money that they are investing for these data centers and for all the products, it doesn't show a return. There's no profit. There's no return on investment for it. I mean, tiny 3%, something like this, and yet they're putting in 500 billion here, and it's also, even the markets are getting the idea that it's all a little suspect because, you get Amazon lending to Microsoft, who lends to Anthropic or whatever, and they all record this as revenue or profit, when actually it's the same money going around in a circle. I mean, it's reminiscent of the dot-com boom of some years past. So I think they're very desperate about all of this, and that's their primary, but it's making them, very antsy, uptight, tense, erratic. I hadn't seen what you said that Trump had mentioned. But we do know that they had a meeting, I think, wasn't it on Saturday? They called everyone to Camp David, and they had a meeting at Camp David. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene came out with her tweet saying, no, this isn't speculation, it's real, I know. Now, does that mean that we are heading into a nuclear attack on Iran? I don't think so. I really don't think so, because it's not the first time. It's been raised before, as I understand it from people with direct sort of knowledge of this. And the military said, no way, this is a war crime, and that is against military standards. And we are not allowed to allow you to commit war crimes. Ultimately, of course, as I understand it, but you'd have to ask some American expert, but ultimately, as I understand it, the president can overrule the chief of staff, but it would be a big event. And would the cabinet go along with that? I mean, big questions. So what's going to happen in Iran? I just don't think that the United States has the wherewithal now to mount a big war on Iran. I don't think it has the fuel besides the intercept missiles. Because don't forget, this middle distillate that is missing from the refineries can either be distilled into diesel or kerosene, but not both at the same time. It's one or the other. And at the moment, I think they're choosing diesel because diesel is in great shortage. Is there enough kerosene? Well, we can see, the supply lines are not great in the US. We saw when it comes to the aircraft carriers, the supply lines for a little bit of meat and vegetable for 5,000 men on board a carrier, terrible. Criminal. You can't have 500 men and feed them a little bit of a few chopped up carrots and a slug of whatever it was, spam or something, because there'll be a revolt, I think, at some point. Anyway, so supply lines. So I don't want to try and be sort of, too predictive on this or too assertive. We don't know Trump, has an impaired mental facilities. You never know what can come from this. It's a very dangerous situation. We don't know why he's gone to war with Iran. I was just going to say, if you allow me, just to say one of the things, it was in our Substack of this week. We wrote about the report by Shmuel Meir, which we'd already seen. It was coming out that circles in the military, defense, intelligence field in Israel. It was Ashling that saw it, and she said, look what's happening. It's almost as if they're sort of exchanging messages, and there is a sort of a group think taking place, because that's unusual, because they keep, like most journalists, they keep their things very separate. And it seemed that something was happening, and what they were saying was Netanyahu lied, and he lied to get not a preemptive, but if you like, a preventative war, by declaring that Iran was on the edge of a weapon. And he used emotive language, a sword at our throat. This was the 12th hour, invoking the Holocaust. And the reality was that the Israeli military did not support that view at all. Now, Mossad, who is appointed by the Prime Minister, David Barnier, who subsequently has been sacked or departed, may have gone along with it. But military intelligence and the military research intelligence group also said, no, we have absolutely no indication of an imminent anything from Iran. Nothing. There is no intelligence to support this. And they wrote this to the cabinet and said, and this has come out in other further investigations amongst these journalists who are talking to people in the intelligence and security community in Israel, and they say they came out, and there was no evidence of that. There was a little bit of talk on internet, but it meant nothing. There was no physical signs of preparations to shift towards it. And they then said pretty much that they agreed with the American assessment. There wasn't a program to move to a weapon. There wasn't a weapons program underway, and Iran was not about to move towards it. So they shared pretty much the line that the Americans were saying, and that's what they wrote to the cabinet. What happened? No one really knows. One of the prominent journalists say, the problem is that Netanyahu's decision-making has become a black box. So no one knows quite how decisions are taken in Israel. And it seems pretty clear that he really pushed the idea of an imminent threat from Iran on emotive language, emotivism, saying, Holocaust, 12th hour, dagger at our throat. And his own military intelligence was saying, nothing, that is not true. And what happened, we don't know, but subsequent investigations by these groups of these journalists who have very good links and who talk to intelligence officers in Israel and others, say when it came to it, there was no discussion. There was no discussion about, this was for the last round, the second round of the war. There was no discussion about its likelihood to collapse Iran. In fact, the assessment that was provided by the military intelligence was very low probability of being able to implode Iran by military means. And that they said, but no one got up and said, look, all of this, Netanyahu's had a fantasy about, this in Iran. This is the main part of his book. A third of it is devoted to, how he is the Messiah of Israel and this is how it's going to be. And, he's the one who's going to save Israel from imminent collapse and worse, complete imminent death from, effectively saying, in a week's time, none of us will be here. I mean, that's the sort of language. So no one got up and said anything. So my point in this article was basically saying, how much did the American officials know before they had that meeting? If you recall that meeting at the Situation Room, they have contacts and links with Israeli military intelligence, and I assume so. It'd be very strange if they didn't. It would be a big question mark if they didn't know that the military intelligence was saying, we see no signs of it, there's no evidence of it, and we regard the likely outcome of an attack were it to happen to be of success, to be very low. Did they know this? Did they say that to Trump? We have quite extensive reporting of that from the New York Times. I think you probably read it, about that meeting in the Situation Room when Netanyahu went really hard on this operation and saying it was going to be a 4-day exercise and it was an easy war. And so did Trump's team know that there was a contrarian view being expressed within the Israeli official establishment or not? And if not, why not? And if they did, what did they do about it? Did they say anything? Because, this is overtones of the Iraq scandal. You remember Colin Powell waving the sort of, the powder, weapons of mass destruction, imminent, we have to take action, destroy Iraq. Well, in a way, Netanyahu, he didn't wave a vial around, but he was saying, it's imminent, it's coming, we have to take, in which case, America went to war on false pretenses. Just as in Iraq went to war on the false pretenses that there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none in Iraq. And we know afterwards it was false intelligence that took them there. And again, in the Iraq occasion, there were people telling them, telling the officials, that there isn't intelligence that supports weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I know that. And then, the head of intelligence would come back from meetings with Bush and say, well, the decision's been made anyway, so now we have to fix the intelligence around the decision. So, this seems to me to be almost a repeat of the Iraq situation. So it's very serious, and very serious about, who is responsible for this. So I think there are two things that are quite one can draw on from this. I think the first must be that I think there is real anger in Israel because they feel, Netanyahu took Israel to war and it was a complete strategic failure and an intelligence failure. And I'm not sure, I think this might be the end of him ultimately, not now. There's elections coming up in October and things, but there's a lot of feeling. This is, to take Israel to war is always considered in Israel to be such an existential issue that you don't do it unless you have absolutely, as the Americans say, you have the receipts. And if they didn't, I think it's, even though we won't see it because all of these sort of discussions happen below the radar in Israel. You don't always hear what you won't see in the Western press or you won't see in the English language press, some of these discussions taking place. But I think it will have an effect in Israel, and I think it will have an effect in America. And one of the reasons I said, I don't know, but I think that some of this must be permeating even through to Washington, this sort of sense that maybe we've been taken into a war without justification. So I don't think, even if Trump suggested it, I think there would be pullback from officials because everyone who's involved in that decision bears responsibility. Yes, you can say it's the president who pushes the button, but actually it is all the officials who advise him or didn't advise him that have the responsibility too. So I don't know whether this will happen or not. But as I say, everything is really a sort of, they're in a meltdown about the economic situation, about the political situation in America, about Japan, and they're in not quite the same meltdown, but they're pretty anxious about what's happening in Ukraine. The Russians are really attacking, pummeling the infrastructure. They've destroyed the Odessa and the Black Sea ports pretty thoroughly. And now we have escalation from the Europeans providing missiles to Ukraine to fire even, more than deep Russia, beyond deep Russia, in that Samara base which is their space station, that apparently they fired a missile. We don't know what damage, if any, it created, whether it was just a big fireball, because we know the Ukrainians have been putting kerosene in their warheads in order to have the effect of flames and smoke and everything. It doesn't do much damage, but it's good PR from the Ukrainian perspective. So all of this is sort of coming together, and it's still a dangerous moment, I think.